We'll say good morning to you, Matt. Make sure we can hear you.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Oh, wonderful. We are so excited, Matt, to have you. And I'll ask everybody who's online now just to, if you will, make sure you're muted because we are going to have an incredible dialogue with Matt. We're going to spend about 35 minutes in a fireside chat session. He's so graciously offered to conduct this with us, and he's also offered to take some questions from the audience. So if you would, why don't you put your questions in the chat, and that way we can weave them into the dialogue. We'll be nimble in that, but again, just really appreciate the opportunity because Matt, MVB is a hometown hero. I have to say, West Virginian and West Virginians, and then those of us who have spent a lot of time in the entrepreneurial community and fintech, just really have been just so amazed by the leadership that MVB has shown, and under your leadership as well. And I know we're gonna talk about it, but for those of you who, I'm sure many of you are familiar with MVB, it's really a success story for the state, and then more broadly regionally, and then increasingly nationally. I personally hear MVB being mentioned with such banks as Cross River Bank, with Silicon Valley Bank, and Matt, you joined as Chief Strategy Officer and head now of the Edge Ventures division, to a bank that is publicly traded. It's on NASDAQ. It has long had a community focus, but it also now provides globally trading, clearing, and exchange technologies, as well as its commitment to the local community. And I think we'll break into that, break that down a little bit as we talk about MVB Bank, but probably more critically, Matt, because a lot of entrepreneurs are here for almost your personal story too. And it's one of, I think, really a great story because you have had such global leadership. You've been both in the US, you've been in Europe, you've had other industry disciplines such as your work at GE. And when you made the transition to the bank, you became instrumental. And I knew about you even before I came back to West Virginia with helping shape a global fintech strategy. And we just want to welcome you and thank you. And I think we have such a great attendance today because most of the people here, they know you personally. But I wanted to give you a chance just to share a little bit from you about your background and what brought you to MVB.
Sure, thanks for the introduction, and thanks again for having me. And really appreciate everything that you and the Vantage Ventures team is doing for West Virginia and the entrepreneurial community at large. So thanks again for this opportunity. So the background in my tie, I grew up in West Virginia and did my undergraduate work at WVU Engineering. And as you mentioned, I started working for GE, spent some time in the US and in Europe before going back to get my MBA, and then made my way back to West Virginia and did consulting and some teaching work at the university as well. And while I was doing that consulting work, it was across multiple industries. I did work in healthcare, oil and gas, higher education, state and local government, did some federal government work with NASA. But for the 10 years I was consulting, 9 of those 10 years, MVB was a client of mine. And just to see their growth and to see the entrepreneurial nature of the company was something that was really exciting. And as I wanted to be a part of something that was growing quickly and sort of knew was headed towards doing something big, MVB was a pretty obvious choice. The team, the talent, and this excitement around the company itself were something that were a number of things that brought me back.
Yeah, Matt, I so appreciate that because, MVB, first off, you've seen it from the inside out, a decade worth of work from the outside and now being the inside, and how well you regarded it from that vantage point, but then also how well we regard it first off in its efforts to bring a strong customer experience, to really think about meeting customers where they are, their unique needs when you're a bank like MVB, but now of course the pursuit of a fintech strategy. And I think there's a lot of interest in really what it means to pursue fintech from the bank perspective. And then of course, getting you to share a little bit behind the scenes of what your work entails now that you're inside the bank.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sort of the early days of MVB and the core competency they have was they were uh, extremely intentional and almost fanatical about a great client experience. In the early days, it was very much the communities that they served. So at that time, mostly West Virginia and then into Northern Virginia, it is this really strong skill set, this strong attention to client experience, and at that time, a consultative approach and one that they were good problem solvers to help meet their clients where they were. So with our fintech strategy, it was taking that same I'd say that same attention to detail and focus on the client, which is expanding it beyond a geographic community now towards an industry community, which was fintech. And this was close to 4 or 5 years ago. 5 years plus when MVB made our first investment. So at that time, multiples on fintech companies weren't nearly where they were today. It was earlier in the trend. So it was much more courageous of our board and our CEO at the time to start making the investments. And when I say the investments, it's the equity investments in other companies outside of MVB that are in fintech, but also we were taking a portion of the bank's earnings, of our mortgage company's earnings, and placing that into building our own fintech business. And at the time, the first fintech business that MVB had was really one where we had this thesis where we saw fintech companies at that time. You'd think more of someone like Stripe was around the time, Square, not necessarily their Cash App business, but Square's business. And there were a few neobanks that were around then. And they were taking market share from banks. And the trends that were driving that, we assessed that they would continue to do that. No matter how hard banks tried, the fintechs were much better at identifying a niche, building out the solution, having a profitable business model, and then scaling it quickly. And a big part of that was they were just far better at customer acquisition than banks are. Mm-hmm. And we saw those trends continuing. At the same time, the other part of the trend was all of those companies needed a bank to support their business model. So for us, it was one where we saw them continuing to win. We didn't see a situation where we could invest enough money to do what they were doing ourselves. And at the same time, needed a bank. So our thesis and then our approach became, well, why don't we be the best banking partner for the tech companies? And that was it. It wasn't a 100-page research report or anything of that nature. It was one where, and it applies to entrepreneurs, just form a thesis, then go out and test that thesis in the market. And very early on, we got traction and a little bit of luck as well. And we landed a couple of large daily fantasy sports clients. And you think, oh, daily fantasy sports and fintech, where does that fit together? Much of the banking needs of a daily fantasy sports company, where they operate a wallet where they're storing value for their customers, for their users. The banking needs of that are very similar to someone that Venmo or PayPal or a neobank that they may have. The type of talent that they have inside their team and their payments team. They have many of them have their own payments team, which is also would be similar to what you'd expect in an online or an e-commerce merchant. So from the banking perspective and how we support and service them and how we connect with them, it's part of our definition of fintech. And so we tested the thesis. We had some wins, so we're able to ramp up and invest more money in the bank's fintech business, where we are supporting those tech companies, those entrepreneurs who are out there growing businesses. Additionally, over the last couple of years, we've added on to how we get some positive exposure to the trends driving fintech. We now have 3 professional services companies, Chartwell, Paladin, and Trabian. They address compliance consulting, fraud and digital identity consulting, and software development, all focused in and around e-commerce, fintech environment. We continue to make equity and near equity investments and minority investments in fintech companies and reg tech companies. And then most recently, we formed Edge Ventures, where we now have 3 portfolio companies under the Edge Ventures holding company, where we're building and growing our own tech companies.
Yeah, Matt, I'm just listening to you and the wave that you rode so early. Fintech today is globally just behind allocation of capital, just behind the medical community. And you think about the capital efficiency of the companies you're talking about, and you realize how much money is flowing into these entities relative to what it takes to take a small molecule and turn it into a drug, just to contrast and how much money and where you all have become early players. I want to take one moment to acknowledge what you said because I don't want anyone to miss out on it. You talked about your fanatical focus on the customer experience and the customer. And I just want to personally thank you. And I think we all do because COVID's been tough on a lot of people. And you've continued to have that focus, but now you're executing in parallel, executing on a tremendous fintech strategy. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions come in when we start talking about how you work with entrepreneurs and what it means to partner. And it's not easy, I know, to be in your seat. But can we just talk a little bit about the fact that you just mentioned that MVB is in the 5 large categories of fintech as we think about it? It's a tremendously broad segment. You're in payments, you obviously are in lending, you're doing some help with the retail investing. I could go on and on. There must be some lessons that you've learned out of executing on such a broad-based strategy. Do you want to share some of those with us?
Yeah, so I'll talk. So first we think of it as what businesses are we in, and I mentioned as a bank we're providing banking services to fintech companies. So that's one of the businesses we're in. We have professional services, we have the investment side, and then growing our own. So those are the different ways that we approach it. The original portion of MVB's fintech strategy was focused, and today much of the revenue and earnings contribution that we're producing today comes from the bank supporting technology companies, and that's where we have the most engagement with entrepreneurs. And it is a broad strategy. The way we think of it is, first, we identify, it's going to seem a little bit cliche or obvious, but I'll add some details behind it. We identify industries or verticals that are fast growing and have low competition. So if you think fast growing, cryptocurrency, neobanks, payments, the daily fantasy sports, online gaming is one of them. And from there, we are looking to how do we provide a full suite of products to support them. So from the banking, typically you hold money for deposits, you lend money or borrowing, and then we move money. So money comes in and money comes out. So those are the product sets. If you think of this as a matrix, you have high growth, low competition industries, and then we have a full suite of products to support their needs. So the complexity of that is broad, both product wise as well as industries that we're supporting. A little bit deeper behind it in terms of what lessons have we learned. I think the bigger one, or one of the more ones that we focus the most on, the reason that many of those industries are low competition is because they have a much higher perceived risk for a bank to support them. There aren't a significant number of banks that say they look to support the cryptocurrency industry or payments or neobanks or gaming. So what we have to be really good at, which is where the lesson comes in, is one, we believe that there's a gap between the perceived risk and actual risk. We don't think that there's no risk or that they're low risk, but we think that the gap between perceived and actual is one that is going to keep it lower competition. And then we also believe that we can build the capabilities to appropriately manage the risk. Just getting in the industry, and as a bank or a regulated institution, we still have to be able to manage the risk that does remain. So I think that's one of the most important lessons in this particular, or I say it's emphasized within the banking industry or any regulated industry, that it is important to invest in that key capability of risk assessment and risk management. Mm-hmm. The next piece, which I think is probably more global for entrepreneurs, we didn't jump into all the industries all at once, and we didn't try to offer all products all at once. Mm-hmm. So it was very early on, once we formed the initial thesis, was to try to focus. It's a proper balance between focus and being opportunistic. And try to start whatever the product was that we wanted to offer first in a specific industry, or even specific clients in many cases. Our venturing into one particular industry starts with one client and solving their needs, doing it well, and then moving on and taking how can we apply that and turn it into not just support of an individual client, but being able to support a product line or a business. So it's that balance, and I'd say we're still learning, but how we balance between the opportunistic nature with the focus is something that I think we're getting better at. We're pretty good at. We continue to get better at, and we'll continue to focus on how we can improve that one.
Yeah, Matt, I think that is a really important lesson you just taught all of us. And that is the perspective of risk, and meeting those, sort of opportunities through a risk adjusted mindset, which is very hard to do until I think you're creating this portfolio, if you will, of cross-sectional representations of different categories that let you better connect dots, as John Chambers likes to say to us when we're looking at opportunity. I am wondering, because you mentioned it, is there some intentionality in your professional services strategy to help create or actually enable a more de-risk scenario to some of these literally cutting edge companies like other neobanks, or like the crypto world or the gaming?
Yeah, you hit on it, and I think the impetus behind it's compliance and Chartwell. So compliance consulting with Chartwell was our first professional services company that we acquired, and it was exactly what you picked up on, was de-risking. And there are a couple of ways. First, they had a phenomenally talented team that they had built, and the pace that we were growing, we knew we needed access to talented, and they were across the country, and they served had international experience within their team members as well. So it instantly gave us access to a much larger talent base to support our growth internally. Additionally, we at the bank found ourselves, especially with early stage fintech companies, we were providing advice, oftentimes free advice, to our fintechs, helping them develop the risk components of their program. And we saw that as a business opportunity, to bring someone or bring a company in that we could refer the early stage companies over to them so they can build up their risk programs. And then that would make it a couple of things. It makes it faster for us to be able to assess the risk and onboard those clients. And it also gives us some comfort, and it helps us to know that they've worked with the company at arm's length to build out their risk program. So they being our clients, we're more prepared as they engage in our sales process and onboarding process. So it de-risked in a couple of ways. Like I said, it was internal, helped us build capacity, as well as helped our clients build some of their capabilities.
Yeah, and Matt, I would add there's a third leg to that stool, and that's your intentionality about creating a sustainable competitive advantage for MVB. That ability to structure and have, if you will, an integrated chain of activities at an arm's length. It must bring you a great insight too, and comfort in the fact that MVB can continue to lead thoughtfully and responsibly in this new generation of rapidly changing financial services.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we repeated it a couple of times since.
Yeah. We've watched. We've watched, the stock market's watched. It's been cool to see that. And maybe that's a good transition, because I wonder if your learnings there helped you create Edge Ventures and the structure you've put in place, or were you running that idea along in parallel? Can you talk to us a little bit about how Edge Ventures came about and where you're heading with it?
Yeah, in Edge Ventures, I think, as I try to describe this story, you'll see an evolutionary approach to strategy. So you mentioned John Chambers and connecting the dots. I think another key piece that he talks about is when we think of strategy, it's the right product in the right market at the right time. And as our capabilities evolve, and as the industries evolve that we support evolve too, the right market is changing, and our ability to produce the right product changes. And so as we lead that into Edge Ventures, it was something we've continued this focus on the client experience. We've always had this consultative approach to try to solve problems for our clients. And so that puts us in a position where we were often, and fintech is a very, I say, complex or complicated, and that there are in order to launch a fintech program, it's usually takes at least a year. There's probably 10 to 12 different parties or companies involved or vendors. So the supply chain or value chain is pretty complicated, and quite a few other entities involved. It's not just a fintech and a bank. There's so many other groups and companies that have to pull together to launch a program. And so with our consultative approach, we found ourselves very frequently making referrals to other parties. And so when we started to not be able to find a referral 3, 4, or 5 times, we started to see the pattern of where there may be a market opportunity. We wanted to be able to fill that hole. And we felt like as a company and where we sat, we had, I won't say better, but we had enough or additional data points to help us have a good feel about what the right product in the right market. And because we were having the questions so frequently, that helped us get some validation that it was the right time for the product as well. So then Edge Ventures was a way that we could capitalize on that opportunity. We couldn't find an existing company out there. And so we thought we had enough information to validate at least the early parts, the early assumptions we had. And so by that point, we started to develop and or bring in talent to be able to build our own companies to solve those needs. And we've done that in a couple of different ways. So we have 3 companies in Edge Ventures. One of them is called Victor, one is called Grand, and one is called Flexia. Victor is one that was completely homegrown, concept homegrown, hired and built a team internally. Grand is one where we had the concept, we acquired the assets of another company and repurposed it for the product that we where we thought it would serve. And then Flexia is one where we saw an opportunity, and then we found a company that was also trying to address that opportunity and combine to take on them. So we've had a different model to form the company. In each case, it was where we saw an opportunity based on the data points that we were getting, the market feedback we were getting, and we looked at the best way for us to capitalize was to tackle it on our own.
Yeah. Matt, it's such an exciting thing for, I think, all of us to hear. There's industry professionals on the phone, there's entrepreneurs, there's innovators, there's academics. Can you talk a little bit, just your personal opinion, of course, on the talent sets that are needed to be in a fintech startup or in a fintech community? Because you just mentioned, and I guess I didn't realize, you all had an idea and you actually took it to company formation. That's what we're trying to do all over West Virginia. So talk to us a little bit about what you saw for talent needs there.
Yeah, and so a good bit of my time is around talent assessment, talent identification, talent attraction, trying to recruit in leaders. So each of our portfolio companies have their own leadership teams, their own boards. That's within Edge Ventures. So the talent component of it is huge. So and I think this applies. It's fintech, but from previous work I did, I think this applies really across any technology startup. We are there's this entrepreneurial nature. It's probably it's a mindset as much as it is a skill set, and that's first and foremost something we're looking for. And it's hard to put a full definition around that, but it's Larry and I want to call this, Larry, our CEO, I want to call this morning and talk about is someone who, no matter what organization they're working in, even if they're in a 100,000 person company like GE, they still act like an owner. And it's just in their nature, in their mindset to take responsibility, to be comfortable understanding the environment and taking risk, no matter how big or small they are, appropriate to the role. But that entrepreneurial nature is first and foremost. The ability, I'm biased with the engineering background, to look for good problem solvers. It's very rare that the initial plan is the final plan. So someone who can assess the situation, chart a path forward, based on a solution. I think that's both problem solving and then not just identifying the solution as problem solving. The next one being, can they turn that into a plan? So it's good planning skills. And I think the list could be pretty long, so I'll stop at the 4th one, which is just being very adaptive, which is one of the values of MVB. Is the environment will change, the market will change. Undoubtedly, at least one of the assumptions that we made around the business will not be correct. And so we have to be able to adapt. So I'll stop at those four. There are plenty more, but I think that's a good starter list for us, and more, especially my personal list.
Yeah, no, Matt, I appreciate it just because you described that tenacious, kind of almost gritty culture that really is West Virginians too. Remember that show up every day, like really dig it out, do your job. I always thought my own experiences with entrepreneurs and even the ones like you and that we're dealing with today, the characteristics you just gave for what it means to like join this fintech revolution, to be a participant. It is a knowledge base is important, but you didn't start there. You started with really want with urgency to get something done. And I think all of us on the phone appreciate that we could be part of this entrepreneurial wave. We had a cool question come in from the audience. And I just really, I think it's one that we kind of skipped over, but it's important. So Ellie, thank you. The question is, do you know, with Edge, when you think about it, what's sort of the max number of companies you'd like to partner with or build? Is it, do you start with infinity or what's your thesis there, Matt? How much can you handle?
Yeah, it's a great question, and not the first time that we've had this conversation at MVB. So I step back to the broader strategy and looking at MVB as a company. We are publicly traded bank, which comes with its certain expectations around performance in short term, midterm, and long term. So I think MVB's structure and goals that as the parent or corporate help drive the contribution that we're looking for from Edge. And so from that piece, we then get to what we talk about, our purpose, which being trusted partners on the financial frontier, committed to your success. So we want to be on the financial frontier. And then we talk some sort of a little bit more informally about a moonshot, or what are our bigger aspirations. And one thing we may hear is that, can we positively impact the financial lives of 1 billion people? And now, as you start to look, well, that's a really big number. That's more consumers than there are in the US. So we start to look at how do we pull those bigger ideals and aspirations and purpose together with our financial responsibility. And based on those different components, our number is not infinity. It's not even 100. I think our contribution to MVB, and especially how we finance the companies today, MVB is financing those from earnings from our other businesses. The original core and retail businesses of MVB Bank that were started in Fairmont 21 years ago, those still contribute, plus the mortgage company, which we have ownership in, those still contribute the bulk of the earnings that are funding Edge Ventures. So we want to be responsible for that capital. So the number is, less than 10, more than likely my number that I think of. But right now we're very much focused. We have 3 companies, and we're very deep and focused on helping those 3 companies be successful. I think some early success there can adjust what that number would be, but it's a number less than 10 that we think about it. It's not in the hundreds or thousands.
Yeah, interesting. It's when you think about the opportunity and you just leveled the word billions. And as we know, fintech, really the great promise of it is that you actually can very efficiently and effectively reach people that otherwise would not be part of the traditional banking services or have access, right? Technology has been a great equalizer. And we've worked probably for, I think it showed up in the Old Testament that we've tried to enable everyone to have access to financial services, right? And we're finally at this intersecting moment with the reach of technology to meet, obviously you're in business to make a profit, right? I mean, we can't just dismiss that, but we have that nice inflection point where you actually can talk to us about a strategy that you use the word billions of people outside of the US. And it's a value system that also I think aligns with the next question, if I might ask you. So it's a possibility of a big strategy contained to a very doable group of people. But Tanya asked, MVB does a lot with the community to support corporate social responsibilities. she asked, what are some of the favorite things you've seen in this space? I think it might also, the question we might turn this to is, are you looking for entrepreneurs who also have have a social impact or mission to their fintech company?
Yeah, I'll pick probably three different components of it. So as an FDIC bank, we still have what's called Community Reinvestment Act. It's a responsibility for MVB to our communities that we serve and support. So I think there continue to be areas where we as a bank and team members within the bank are supporting the communities, and that can be through loans, it can be through services, it can be through volunteering that we do. So that's something that MVB continues to support, and also through our community development corporation. So that's one area. Then I think the next one we move into, and I may sort of group it into two, is part of our approach to fintech, that original thesis where we were supporting the tech companies, we were the banking partner for the technology companies. That's one area where if we're, by not thinking just about one smaller geography, we see many fintech companies or technology companies in general, if they're able to pull together a community based on an affinity, whether it be the environment or other ESG components, and they're able to build out a product that meets those needs. And it may be different funding sources, but it may be how they attract or acquire customers, how they are creating value or capturing value. So our ability to support them as a bank or as an investor gives us a much broader reach, where if we were to try to do that on our own, we wouldn't be able to. But just the strategy that we've taken through the investments, as well as being a partner to companies who have a great idea and have their own business model and their own team to go out and execute on it, that gives us a much broader reach.
Yeah, Matt, it's a very powerful statement you just said, and it should not be lost on any of us. You're powering the next generation of innovation in the fintech community through your work, through MVB, and you're obviously innovating on your own in your own right. And one of the questions is, have you any breakthrough successes you want to talk about at MVB in your portfolio? But the second one is the acknowledgement that you're this invisible hand almost that's allowing for breakthrough success. But I'll pause there. I'll use your word to ask you the question. Any moonshots going on in the portfolio you want to talk about?
I'll talk about what's publicly available out there. So I think we formed our company Victor. It was an internal project for a while, but it was officially formed in May. Technology company, and our team has actually built the product and signed on the first customers in revenue in September. So if you think of timing and how quickly can you move, we're in a pretty crowded space, which that one is called banking as a service. We picked a particular area of that. Most companies in that industry, similar to Victor, are raising tens and $20-30 million. We're doing that on a much smaller early investment. Back to the concept we talked about, focus. We focus on some very specific products. We're leveraging some existing client relationships of MVB, and we're able to get an early product into market. So I think that's a win or excitement. In terms of moonshots, all three of the opportunities that we're targeting are pretty large markets. So not any particular numbers or any of those, but just Victor within its banking as a service, Grand, which is focused on, it's really utilizing a bank product as a payments instrument, similar to the way, if you think about probably the easy example is a Starbucks card. It's a stored value account, but Starbucks is making a ton of money from it because they're saving money. To be able to take that to any retailer across the globe is pretty big opportunity. And then I think with Flexia, it's addressing an industry, brick and mortar, initially addressing an industry around brick and mortar casino, and it's still very cash intensive. And they're one of the last industries that are cash intensive and looking to bring in more modern experience for those users. So all three intentionally are pretty big opportunities.
Yeah, Matt, I can't help but draw back everybody's attention that you just talked about these massive opportunities. And they're in ways that we just really ourselves don't even think about until you mention like the overnight return rate on like a Starbucks card. How much excess value is just stored there by us that you sweep up all those nickels and you're all of a sudden seeing billions of dollars of capability. Toast yesterday IPO'd. It's a point of sale restaurant app, and it IPO'd. Its IPO price increased 56% in day one trading. It's absolutely crazy, and that's where you guys are. You're in that field, and so I just applaud you for like thinking the way you're thinking, because we oftentimes think moonshots mean solving cancer, but they really mean re-envisioning the plumbing and the pipes and these ideas that have made financial services work for so long, but with technical efficiency.
Yeah, it's there's no shortage of opportunity, and I think many of the financial plumbing or the plumbing of the financial system is 20, 30, 40 years old. So we see continued opportunity as that gets modernized.
Yeah, totally.
That may be the biggest understatement of today. But,
right. And I think we just had a really fun question come in. Has MVB implemented any of these fintech ideas to improve your internal efficiencies?
So when we first formed our strategy 4.5 years ago, we looked at what are the different ways we can get positive exposure to the trends driving fintech. One of them that we've talked most about today was being a banking partner for fintech companies. There is, the three other pieces were to make investments in those tech companies, to adopt some of the technologies and offer them directly to MVB's existing customers, and then to utilize some of the technology to improve our efficiency. So while we've talked mostly about that one component of the strategy, we do actively work on the other three parts as well. And one of those are looking at technologies just to improve the internal productivity and efficiency within inside the bank. So the ones that are our clients, they typically have their own consumers that they're attracting. But we do have one of our investments is a RegTech, a regulatory technology company. And we do utilize that internally. It's streamlined some of our due diligence that we do on commercial clients.
Yeah.
And there are other examples too, but that's one that's they're in our investment portfolio. They are a vendor to MVB, and then also working to be our client of MVB too. So it's so the answer is yes. And there's another one of our investment portfolio companies, a company called Socure. You can look them up. They're I think unicorn status, over $1 billion in their valuation, and they're also a vendor that we utilize for identity verification, or more specific in the banking lingo, CIP, which is Customer Identification Program, and KYC, which is Know Your Customer.
Yeah, Matt, it's very cool to see you all put your money where your mouth is, or vice versa, right? That you're actually also advantaged by your participation in fintech and knowledge. We might find that, just in sort of the category of community and regional banks, that's not always the case. That there's, it's still, they're coming up in the adoption of technology. We've had this wonderful question from Kristen Hammer, which I think speaks well to the community way that entrepreneurship and embracing of what you're doing is happening. She wants to know, are there ways that we can support MVB? What could we do as a community? We can definitely give you our deposits, so you have right, so your balance sheet works. But anything else? Do you want to meet new entrepreneurs? What's how would you answer that question?
Yeah, well, you gave my first answer already, which is we'd love to have you as a customer or client.
Yeah.
And I think it's helpful in any sort of business, especially one that looks at early stage. Or we like to get feedback from the market, so engaging with us. So whether that's through introduction or referral, or just sharing an experience that you're having. Not every fintech company that we talk to becomes a client of ours, but we maintain relationships with just about all of them. And at some point in the future, it may turn into a client relationship, but just keeping that relationship, keeping that dialogue open. So we're both sharing information and learning from each other. That's one of the biggest opportunities to contribute and be part of the story, even if you're not necessarily a client.
Yeah, continuous learning is so critically important, right? In this cycle of innovation where it's going so fast, product cycles are compressing, customer needs are changing probably faster. Customer expectations are probably changing faster than actually the definition of the needs, if we could kind of parse it so finely. I thought I might just kind of wind us down because, Matt, we've fired a bunch of stuff at you. I have two last questions, and if there's anyone else who wants to ask one more question from the audience, we'll take it. But how about with entrepreneurs? You just mentioned sort of fintech entrepreneurs come to you. Is there a website or a link on the Edge Ventures website? How do they get in touch with you if they have a fintech solution or another entrepreneurial idea?
Yes, so if they're a fintech or payments entrepreneur, and again, our definition of fintech is pretty broad. So any company that's using technology to manage or move money,
Yeah.
that encompasses the RegTechs, cryptocurrency, gaming. So with that definition, through the MVB website, the fintech component of it, much of those leads would come in through the bank's fintech business. They're the ones with we built that team intentionally with a number of serial entrepreneurs who have been fintech entrepreneurs that have been successful in concept, building a company, selling a company, exiting. So they have been in the shoes that if you're an entrepreneur coming to MVB that you're currently in, and they'll help you navigate through the different. So I mentioned investments and professional service companies, and ones we're building our own. So they have a great feel for the organization as a whole and where it might be the best place to navigate through, but they're a great entry or first door for you to come in through.
Wonderful, Matt. Thank you for that. And so our last question, we really hope you're going to come back. And if you were in this same seat again, this hot seat, 3 years from now, what would you like to have seen happen in financial services and fintech? What's your what for you personally, or the bank, or even more broadly in the industry? What is 3 years? What do you hope to see?
Yeah, I'll probably talk more about what some of the assumptions that we expect to see. And then we're building our strategy around those. My hope would be that our assumptions are close to accurate. We think, one, there aren't many banks today that support tech companies in the way that we do. We believe that number will increase, and we think it needs to increase because of the fintech companies who are creating value for their customers, for the end users, whether it be a consumer or a business. The more value that they're creating means more problems that are getting solved. It comes back to one of the examples you mentioned earlier, which is they're far better at hitting underserved segments of the population. So if more of them are successful, that means more value is created. More than likely, more people are being served by the financial system than are today, or better served by the financial system. And in order for that to happen, there have to be more banks like MVB that support those fintech companies. So that's probably the biggest part of it. I think I'd say most of the other, but that's probably the biggest one is more banks. And I'd say the financial services ecosystem is much more inclusive and collaborative between banks and fintech companies.
Matt, you'll forgive me. I had just a little glitch in my software there. I hope I didn't miss much, but I want to make sure that I acknowledge that you just laid out a vision that was about other people, was about serving the industry and others well. And I can't think of a better way to close, but to thank you both for being a visionary and to have enormous generosity in the way you think about advancing tech. I know we've all appreciated having you today. So Matt, please come back, visit often, and keep up what you're doing on behalf of all entrepreneurs.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely will. And thanks again for having me and everything you're doing for West Virginia and the entrepreneurial community.
Yeah, well, we are all a great team. So Matt and everybody who attended, thank you so much. We'll see you at our next Real Talk. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.